Thank you very much, Dr. Abdu, for joining me this morning, first of all. I know you're extremely busy.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Abdu, we live in interesting times. Crisis related to COVID-19 shaken lives of many people around the world. And now with the second wave around the corner, it's very difficult to remain calm, especially the children going back to school, parents worrying about their job securities, and we all, I guess, worry about the second lockdown. How do we remain calm during this pandemic?
I think what's really interesting about this pandemic is that it challenges us as a society and as a community to simplify our lives and to really prioritize what's important, to separate those things that are probably distractions and probably unnecessary investments of our time and our energy, and focus on the things that are really important. And I think we can apply that same philosophy and that same attitude to reclaiming a sense of peace and a sense of comfort and security and hope in our lives. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. We can start with just the most simple and basic thing imaginable, which is just to breathe. It's amazing that something that we do thousands of times a day is something that a lot of us still don't focus on, but it can provide an immense amount of comfort to us if we do it properly. I always tell myself, and I tell my children, start your day with a deep breath, end your day with a deep breath. Try and take in all the good things that are around you when you are taking in a big deep breath and reminding yourselves of the comfort and any degree of privilege and good fortune that you're surrounded with, and release everything inside you that is full of any degree of tension or uncertainty or fear every time you breathe out. And it seems simple enough, but we don't do this as often as we should. I tell people to take 10 deep breaths when they're at a red light instead of 10 deep sighs. Every time you find yourself feeling as though the weight of the world is becoming heavier, take some deep breaths and find that space inside of you to bring yourself back to a place of peace. So that's something that I think we can do that's just very basic. It's a physical function that brings us a sense of relief. The other thing is, I think it's really important to remind ourselves, instead of focusing on what's missing from our lives, the inconveniences, the sacrifices that we're making, let's focus on what is actually present in our lives. What are the sources of comfort that we've been able to create better bonds with because of the pandemic, in spite of everything else? Our family, friends, the kindness of strangers, the love and support that comes from hidden places that we would not have expected. These are real blessings that we owe ourselves to focus upon. And if we do that, I think it will create a much better lens that we can view the world through. And it makes it much easier for us to cope. And following from that, I think it's just exceedingly important to remind ourselves that what we give is what we get. If we are choosing a perspective that is bleak and that is lacking in hope and that carries with it a burden of doubt, it's going to be very difficult to reap anything from that that is not going to be the same. Instead, we want to implore one another to feed others good energy, to let that good energy flow from yourself to others, and it will flow back to you. And that may seem a little bit difficult to understand, but it follows you. It follows in your smile, it follows in the way that you talk and communicate with other people, your body language, and it's infectious. And that's the sort of thing that can spread just as easily and hopefully more effectively than any virus. And if we do that, we can build strength throughout an entire global community. It starts with one person, but it can spread very, very easily. And finally, I just want to remind people that as daunting and as overwhelming and as scary as these times may be, remind yourself that you are not alone, that whatever you're experiencing is something that is undoubtedly being experienced by thousands, if not millions of other people. And the key is to share that burden with one another, to remind ourselves that we're here to support one another. There is much love, support, and compassion in the world around us, but we must seek it to find it. And if we do that, we will not only survive, we will thrive.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdu. It sounds interesting, especially you mentioned a very important thing, which is hope. I think it is very difficult to find hope during the age of pandemic and fear. How can we best look for these sources of hope in these troubled times?
I think we need to look for role models who are demonstrating resilience, who are demonstrating courage, and who are inspiring examples of doing a lot with little. I think everybody can look around the world and find someone else who is in a more unfortunate situation than they are in, whether it's due to war, famine, displacement, any sort of other trauma. And yet there are countless examples of people rising above that, doing great things, sharing very positive attitudes. And I think we need to draw upon those examples to remind ourselves of what we can accomplish and what we can do and how much we can continue to grow despite the challenges in front of us.
So the way I understand what you're saying, it is very important to focus on here and now, to be mindful, to be grateful, to count our blessings, to look at things from some kind of perspective, to look for role models. And most likely we can find these role models not only around us, but also in the history. Personally, I just would like to ask you, what do you do to find inner peace for you as a physician and for you as a specialist? It must be very difficult. And I also know you have a young family. So how do you find inner peace in these troubled times?
I'm very privileged by being in the profession of medicine where I can connect with people in their most vulnerable possible state. And that gives me strength when I see patients going through great hardship and great difficulty, and I see them mustering enormous courage and enormous resilience. And that reflects back in their attitude and their motivation to heal, to get better. It's reflected in the strength of their families and the goodwill that they show towards one another when going through difficult situations. And when I see that, it gives me a great deal of inspiration. It gives me a great deal of comfort that I'm seeing something remarkable in terms of the strength of the human spirit. And that carries itself a very, very long way. And when I come home every day, I remind myself of how lucky I am that I'm on the other side of that bed. And the situation could easily be the other way around. I think that instills a great deal of humility in me and a great deal of thankfulness and gratitude for the fact that each day that I'm healthy is a day that I have to celebrate, is a day that I have to appreciate and cherish.
Dr. Abdu, speaking of the first pandemic in the world that we are dealing with, what are your predictions for the future? How much longer are we going to be in this situation, and how much time it will take us as human beings to calm down and get back to normal?
I think there are a lot of very challenging questions ahead of us that are going to be very difficult to answer because there are just so many variables that we have to consider, including a flu season now through much of the Northern Hemisphere, and including an important mission for reestablishing economic stability around the globe. Those are serious challenges to overcome, when we're living through a pandemic. I think my advice is not to look too far ahead. If we look too far ahead into the future, we may ignore what we really need to focus on right now in the present, which again is to limit our expectations, to simplify our lives, to focus on minimizing distractions and doing things that are most important, which is to focus on the peace and health within our own immediate families, to renew the bonds that are most important to us, and to make everything else a secondary priority. I think if we do that, we listen to public health recommendations, and we remind ourselves that we're accountable to everyone around us in terms of our healthy practices, we'll be able to get through this more successfully.
Thank you very much for your wonderful advice and for your time. I wish you all the best, and I hope everybody who listened to this conversation will take your advice seriously and will improve their mental health, well-being, and general happiness in life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.